Hey everyone, welcome back to my channel. Today we are going to be doing a part 4 of Summer-Ween Halloween DIYs. I picked up these pieces of wood from the thrift store. It looks like they had broken into pieces and somebody probably just donated them, but these are going to make perfect Halloween signs. So I am going to start by just using some of my homemade wax and going over both of these. I'm just brushing it on in sections, and then I will use a paper towel to wipe off the excess. And the cool thing about making your own wax is you can go back and change it if you want to, which is exactly what I ended up doing. I didn't really care for the first color, so I just changed it, mixed a different color, and did a second coat over these. Then to age it and give it that really spooky vibe, I am using some black wax on here with a really fluffy brush, and I am dabbing the majority of this wax off of the brush and then just lightly brushing it all over these. Once that was dry, then I am going to use this script stamp that I have, and I wanted to just kind of lightly add the script in random places to these boards. So before I press them to the board, I am dabbing off a lot of the ink onto a piece of paper. Over top of this script, I wanted to add some ravens, so I just traced off a couple ravens from Google. Then I'm going to use some of my carbon paper and just trace these birds onto the boards. And the carbon paper just leaves an outline of the birds so that I could go over that with one of my black paint markers. And I'm not going to fill the birds in with the paint marker. Instead, I am actually just going to use some really small brushes and some of my black chalk paint to fill those in. That way I'm not wasting my paint markers. For this project, I'm using some of my Sculpey air dry clay and a little bit of cold water. I'm starting with a pretty decent sized ball of this clay, and I'm gonna get my fingers nice and wet and start kneading this clay. I'll roll it around and just kind of press together any little cracks or places where the clay is meeting. Since this is going to be a decent sized project, I don't want my clay cracking as it dries, so keeping this wet while I'm doing the project will help with that. Now once I had this all kneaded and rolled out, then I can start squeezing this and rolling it into the shape of a ghost. And I think ghosts truly are the easiest thing to make with some clay. You're just going to roll it out so that that top portion is a lot skinnier than the bottom portion. If you notice the clay getting dry, just dip your fingers back into the water and rub it over the clay piece. I'm just going to continue working with this and molding it until I'm happy with the shape. Then I wanted to make this ghost look more like a sheet ghost, so I'm going to start pinching that bottom section. I'm also using a little clay tool that I got from Dollar Tree to help me press out the clay a little bit at the bottom. And I'm still keeping my fingers wet and just applying pressure by pushing up at the bottom of the ghost and pulling down toward the edges. Again, just keep working this until you are happy with the bottom part. Then I'm going to use the side of that little clay tool, and I'm going to make some little lines going down the ghost. And I'm not doing these very deep, it's just giving a little bit of detail to the sheet ghost. And for this ghost, I thought it would be cute to turn this into a photo holder. So I'm going to use this sharp razor blade. You can use anything really thin or sharp. And I'm just going to press this down into the center back portion of his head and just wiggle it down in there a little bit carefully. Then I am slowly and carefully going going to wiggle a popsicle stick down in that same hole that I just made. This is just going to make the photo holder part just a little bit wider and bigger. Then I set this aside and let it dry for about 2 days. It will probably need some extra time to fully dry since it is so thick. But once mine was completely dry, I did give it a light sanding with some fine grit sandpaper, and luckily mine had no cracks. I painted mine with 2 coats of some white chalk paint, let that completely dry. Then I'm just going to use my paint marker to draw some little eyes. And to finish it off, I sealed it with 2 coats of some Aleene's acrylic sealer. I found this cute little pilgrim lady ceramic figurine at the thrift store and thought she would be perfect to turn into a witch. I decided I wanted to keep the pumpkin as is, as well as her face and her hands. So I am starting by taking a small liner brush and some black chalk paint, and I'm just going to go around her face, her hands, and that pumpkin. Once I've done the lining of the black chalk paint, then I can just go in with another brush and paint the rest of her. Now you may also notice that she is holding some corn, but I am just going to paint over that with the black chalk paint, and you can't even really tell. And I ended up doing just 2 coats of the chalk paint on her. Once she was dry, I kind of felt like she just needed a little bit of texture. She was already wearing a head cover, so I thought I could just work with that and really add the texture to that. And to do this, I'm just using some puffy paint, and I'm kind of just going in the direction that her headdress was already going, and then just over the little pieces of her hair that were sticking out. And this is what it looked like when I was finished. You can see I just kind of made her headdress a little longer. And to really add in more texture, I just used a small paintbrush and kind of dabbed it all into that puffy paint, and then sat her aside to let her dry for 24 hours. And this is how she looked the next day. The puffy paint was all dry and hardened up. Now at this point, if you wanted to, you could leave the puffy paint shiny, but I wanted to blend it more in with her dress, so I went over it with 1 coat of the black chalk paint. And once that was dry, I took her outside and sprayed her with 2 coats of the Aleene's acrylic sealer. Now obviously she needs a witch's hat, so I just pulled out 2 little pieces of my air dry clay, and I'm going to make the top portion of the hat with 1 piece and then the brim of the hat with the other piece. So I'm just kind of shaping and forming these pieces until I was happy with them. Then to do the final fitting for her hat, I did place it on top of her head and just kind of messed with the brim a little bit to make it a little larger and shape that top piece until I liked it. Then I'm just going to use a little bit of water around the edges to clean everything up and make it nice and smooth. To connect the 2 pieces, you could just use a little bit of gel super glue, but I'm just going to scratch up the pieces with a sharp tool and then add some water, and they will actually just stick together. You could leave it at this point, but I wanted my hat to look like it was 1 piece, so I'm just using this little clay tool that I got from Dollar Tree and a little bit more of the water, and I am just kind of pushing the clay from the top piece down into the bottom piece. And once I have it blended together, then I'll just use a little more water on my fingers and smooth it all out. I'm just going to set this on top of her head and shape it exactly how I want it to let this dry overnight for 24 hours. The next day, once it was dry, I used a little bit of fine grit sandpaper to soften up the edges of the brim of the hat, and then I went in and painted this with 2 coats of my black chalk paint. I sealed the hat with 2 coats of Aleene's acrylic sealer, then attached the hat to the top of her head just using a little bit of gel super glue. For this project, I'm going to be using a mannequin hand. I got this one off of Amazon. I actually got 2 of these for the price you can usually find them in a store. I'm also going to be using a magnifying glass for this project. This is just one that I already had, but you can find them inexpensively at the dollar store. To stabilize my hand, I'm just going to use one of these little wood round plaques that I got from Michael's. You can buy these at any craft store. So the first thing I want to do is turn this into a witch's hand. For that, I am going to paint this, and I am using the color Warm Buff in a satin finish. That's going to give this just a little bit of a sheen. And I did end up doing 2 coats over this entire hand. While that's drying, I'm going to paint that bottom base piece with 2 coats of some black chalk paint. After the hand was completely dry, then I am going to bend this hand and the fingers into the shape that I'm going to have in the end. And I'm going to repaint the knuckles where I could see the wood showing through. Then, like I said, I want this to be a witch's hand, so I'm just using some of these cheap black press-on fingernails and some gel super glue. And you don't need to buy any expensive nails for this. These are actually just from the dollar store. Once I have her manicure all done, then I'm going to go in with a little bit of black wax and a small brush, and I'm kind of just gonna make this hand look grungy and dirty and old. And I'm really just focusing this wax on the knuckles and around the fingernails, making that nice and dark, and then just kind of adding it all over the hand. I also wanted to make this look like she was wearing a shirt kind of going down her arm to her wrist. So I'm using some of this lace ribbon. I got this at Dollar Tree around Valentine's Day, and I'm just going to wrap that around her hand right at her wrist and hot glue it to the back side. Then for the actual shirt sleeve detail, I'm using this velvet adhesive fabric. This is actually supposed to be to line jewelry boxes with, and I got it on Amazon, but I'm just going to cut down a piece of that and wrap it around the arm section of this hand. Then to cover up the top of this velvet fabric and also just give it a little more detail, I'm going to wrap one more section of that lace ribbon. To attach the hand to the base part, I just put a screw up through the bottom of the base, and the mannequin hand already has a small hole in the bottom of it, so I just added some gel super glue and put the hand down onto that base. Now, as you may have noticed a little bit ago, the hand was holding this magnifying glass, and I wanted to add a lover's eye to that magnifying glass. I just printed off a public domain painting with a nice eye on it, had that printed off, cut it out, and then I'm going to add it to the back of the magnifying glass using just some tape. And finally, just to dress that hand up a little bit more, I'm using these Halloween rings and putting them on 2 of the fingers. And these are just cheap kids rings that I used a little bit of rub and buff on. And that's going to be it for today's video. I hope you all enjoyed it. Thank you so much for watching. I'll see you next time.